hour before being lifted, marking another night of strikes in Russia's ongoing war on Ukraine. The leaders of Thailand and Cambodia have signed an enhanced ceasefire deal in Kuala Lumpur in the presence of US President Donald Trump, formally ending their deadly border conflict. The agreement builds on a July truce brokered after Trump urged both sides to halt fighting or risk losing trade talks with Washington. The second day of trade talks in Kuala Lumpur is paving the way for a productive meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, says Washington's top trade envoy. US and Chinese officials hold their fifth round of negotiations since May as both sides work to ease trade tensions. Donald Trump says he will increase tariffs on Canada by an additional 10%, announcing the move on Truth Social after blasting an Ontario ad aired during the World Series. He ends trade talks with Ottawa as the ad quotes Ronald Reagan, warning that tariffs trigger trade wars and economic damage. The Turkish group, the PKK, calls on Turkey to take immediate legal steps to safeguard the peace process and allow its fighters to enter democratic politics. In a statement from northern Iraq, the group says freedom and democratic integration laws must be implemented without delay. Lebanon's health ministry says 2 people were killed and another wounded in Israeli strikes on the country's south. The IDF confirms a drone strike near Haruf that killed a Hezbollah Red One force commander, while a second strike on a motorcycle in Kele left 1 person dead. Thousands of Israelis take to the streets demanding the return of the remains of captives still held in Gaza. The protests come as Egyptian heavy machinery enters the strip to support efforts to recover the bodies. Argentines head to the polls in legislative elections that will decide the fate of President Javier Milei's free market reforms and tough austerity program. His party, La Libertad Avanza, seeks to expand its minority in Congress and retain US President Donald Trump's support after a recent financial bailout. US President Donald Trump, currently attending the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur, oversaw the signing of key agreements with Malaysia and Cambodia and also Thailand, aimed at strengthening regional trade and security ties, with Malaysia and the United States signing a cooperation deal to diversify global critical mineral supply chains and promote investments. Malaysia also committed to refrain from imposing export bans or quotas on critical minerals, address non-tariff barriers impacting US food, agriculture and industrial goods, and provide preferential market access for American exports. In a separate agreement, Cambodia announced it would eliminate tariffs on all US industrial, food and agricultural products, while working with Washington to reduce non-tariff barriers. Air Cambodia will also partner with Boeing to strengthen the country's aviation sector. Thailand's leader also praised the reciprocal trade agreement and showed his optimism over the deal. President Trump called the agreements a strong message to Southeast Asia, saying the United States is the region 100% and intends to remain a strong partner for many generations. Let's listen in to what some of the leaders had to say.
And I really feel that when we make deals, we see 2 countries that we do a lot of business with. We do a lot of business with both of them. We have to use that business to make sure they don't get into wars.
I am also pleased that today we announced the joint statement on the framework for a US-Thailand agreement on reciprocal trade, which I hope will facilitate our negotiations on tariffs for conclusion by end of this year.
We're now joined by Stephen Naji. He's a professor at the International Christian University located in Tokyo, Japan. Thank you very much for joining us. Stephen, an eventful Sunday with ASEAN kicking off in Malaysia. A lot to discuss. Of course, this morning we saw the signing of this peace deal officially between Thailand and Cambodia, but also the signing of many treaties and also some promises from Southeast Asian nations in the presence of US President Donald Trump. What image does this put forward at US presence and interaction with the region, especially for trade, as it is a region that was particularly battered by Donald Trump's tariff policy?
Thanks very much, Thomas, for having me. There's a symbolic side to this visit, and then something that is more practical. And the symbolic side is that the president has come to the ASEAN meeting, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This is something that the association wants. It wants to be relevant. It wants to have the highest level representation from the United States visit and acknowledge its importance in the Indo-Pacific's regional integration process. It also wants to have the United States there because it's interested in anchoring extra-regional partners in the region so that it's not overshadowed by China. That's the reality in poll after poll. And I think the most important one is the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies survey on Southeast Asia. While Southeast Asian countries welcome investment from China, they're also extremely worried about its hegemonic ambitions and its behavior in the region. So that's a symbolic side, and I think from ASEAN's standpoint, it's really important. And from the United States side, it wants to demonstrate that it is committed to ASEAN and the region's integration process. In terms of take-homes, I think the peace agreement is very much just, this will sound terrible, it's just icing on the cake. The real achievement really is deals about rare earth materials, commitments from Malaysia in terms of keeping rare earth materials being processed and being shipped. And I think more moving forward, commitments in terms of trade and commitments in terms of abiding by international law. Whether this will happen or not, this will really depend on the United States' behavior under President Trump, who is not necessarily predictable, and it will depend on each ASEAN state's politics. Remember, the region is very heterogeneous. There's socialist states to democratic states to theocratic states, and they all have their own interests. And collectively, their single interest is maintaining strategic autonomy, and this is why they have the association itself.
Yes, Stephen, do stay with us. We will, of course, here on NewsX World, bring you all that news coming out of ASEAN as it continues over the next 3 days. But we have more news coming out of the city of Kuala Lumpur as US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has said that trade talks between the United States and China were moving towards a point where President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping can have a productive meeting this week. Meanwhile, as the talks between the Chinese and US officials have concluded, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that American and Chinese officials have reached a very successful framework for the upcoming meeting. Greer has also said a broad range of topics were discussed, including extending the truce on trade measures. Trump and Xi are expected to meet on Thursday in South Korea at the end of the US president's 5-day trip to Malaysia, Japan and South Korea. Let's in fact listen in to what the two US officials have said ahead of the Trump and Xi meeting.
Sure. We spent a lot of time last night. We spent a lot of time this morning talking about a potential framework moving forward. I think we're moving forward to the final details of the type of agreement that the leaders can review and decide if they want to conclude together. As you know, President Xi and President Trump will be meeting later this week. We've had quite constructive discussions with our Chinese counterparts, and we think we're getting to a point where we have something we can present to the leaders for their consideration.
Yes, this is the fifth time that the Vice Premier Hu Feng and I have seen each other with great respect. And I think what was different this time is this was in preparation for the meeting with the two leaders. So we were determined to provide them for a framework for a successful meeting in Korea, which I think it will.
We are now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung. He is an independent Chinese strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us. Talks in Malaysia sound positive, Andrew. Just the second day of discussions. We've seen the senior Chinese official arrive today, and we're also already getting positive statements. And it seems like they've reached a framework in order for Trump and Xi to look at said framework at their meeting. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, this, of course, paving the final few meters, as it were, before the historic meeting between President Trump and President Xi, hopefully to agree on some sort of modus operandi between these two great powers who are locked in rivalry. Now, I don't think the meeting is going to solve all the problems, but at least both sides are seeking some areas for accommodation. And then the current meeting at the lower levels appear to have reached some sort of a milestone. And I think that from President Trump's point of view, the most important pressing issues are soybeans, which of course represent the Republican Party's main supporters. They're all in the agricultural soybean producing states. And with the midterm looming up, midterm elections looming up, that's very, very urgent and important. And the second, or equally important, of course, is the rare earths restrictions. And hopefully China would be able to ease at least some of the restrictions, but I don't think that Beijing is going to give up that very powerful countermeasure. But at least the paths are being smoothened. Some of the obstacles are being got around with, and paving the way to hopefully more positive meetings between President Trump and President Xi.
Yes. I was wondering if I could go to Stephen Nagy next and ask him about the news that the US and Chinese officials have indeed reached a framework, and the statements from the US officials that it does indeed seem positive, or at least it sounds as it is, coming from those statements from Jamieson Greer and from Scott Bessent. If you could talk about some of the possible sticking points after these 5 meetings that the officials have had, just in the nick of time for that meeting in South Korea at the end of this week.
So I think Mr. Leong has really pointed out a lot of critical points that I think are correct. Both sides want to come to have a deal. The challenge is that I think in the White House, we have somebody that can change the deal at the very last minute. In that sense, I think there's probably some anxiety on the China side if Mr. Trump will come and stick to the talking points. And I think from that standpoint, there is some uncertainty, and not only uncertainty in Beijing, but for the region. The region wants Washington and Beijing to come to the table to try to settle their trade differences, to stabilize their trade relationships so that they can start to begin to expand their trading relationship with both states. The region is extremely complex in terms of its economic integration, and they can't really choose between the United States and China. And again, as I mentioned, they want these two parties to come to some kind of agreement. Now, where are the sticking points? Soybeans, I think, is there. Will China relax the rare earth material exports and exports of processing technologies? I think these are some areas that the United States is looking for. At the same time, I think that they are trying to get some other kinds of compromises from the Chinese if they're going to commit to a trade deal. For example, stopping support through third countries for the Russian war on Ukraine, assistance on North Korea's denuclearization, or other issues within the region. Both countries don't look at trade just through trade lenses. They connect it to everything. And in this sense, I still think that there is some uncertainty about some kind of tentative short-term bargain to cool relations and stabilize relations in the short term. In the mid to long term, the structural competition is going to increase, and I think both sides are preparing for a long competition rather than a short-term deal.
Stephen Nagy, thank you very much for joining us. Absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on over and more news from China, where China's traditional baijiu, a strong liquor often exceeding 50% alcohol, is facing declining popularity among younger drinkers. In response, struggling distillers are introducing milder versions to appeal to a new generation. Economic pressures and Beijing's crackdown on lavish alcohol-fueled banquets are pushing innovation in the sector. Willian Yeben recently launched 29 crush-on, cutting alcohol content from 52 to 29%. Other major producers, including An Hui Gongjing and Shudi Spirits, have introduced similar lighter options to attract modern consumers. Companies are also using minimalist packaging and celebrity endorsements, yet a 2022 survey shows 70% of young Chinese still view baijiu as unhealthy. Andrew KP Leung joins us once again. What more can you tell us about this drink, Andrew, and also the modern Chinese generation, and also which, along like the West, is drinking much less than the older generation?
Well, it is a makeover of a long-established Chinese brand, the Maotai, which dates back to centuries. Of course, the Maotai has been enriched and elevated to almost a national treasure with the price to match. And that finds itself in a lot of banquets between businesses, between businessmen and high-ranking officials. But that, of course, being targeted by the anti-corruption campaign, causing a huge downturn in the fortunes of the Maotai Corporation. And now the Maotai businesses are targeting young people and trying to lower the alcohol content, repackage it, and even adding a degree of or lace the coffee with Maotai so as to invent new products that appeal to the younger generation. But of course, the young generation are very, very health conscious. It depends on the degree of this liquor in either coffee or other drinkables. So I think that nevertheless, the younger generation, they like to try new things. They like to experience new tastes, and that's what's happening now.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew KP Leung. Pleasure to have you on the programme, as always. Now let's turn over to West Asia, where one Palestinian has been killed and 4 have been injured in an Israeli drone attack last night in Gaza's Nuseirat refugee camp in the territory's north, al-awda hospital has said. The Israeli army said in a statement that it carried out the attack against a member of the Palestinian armed group, Islamic Jihad. We are now joined by Peter Bourne, the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz. He joins us live from London. Peter, over 90 people have now been killed since the Gaza ceasefire came into force on the 11th of October. That adds 1 to the tally. Your thoughts on the fragility of the ceasefire and the fact that Israel continues military operations in the enclave, with, of course, the supervision of the American government observing?
Good day to you. Thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here again. Yes, this is a very interesting story. And I'll tell you for why. Because this is no longer a conflict between Israel and Hamas. We've seen that the most influential players, from Donald Trump to all the Arab states and the European Union, are in total agreement that having given up the live hostages and hopefully returning all of the dead ones, the ceasefire, the conflict, should I say, between Israel and Hamas will hold. So why are there continuing outbreaks of violence perpetrated by one side or the other? In the case you've just mentioned, the killing of an Islamic Jihad operative. And there's a power play going on here. It's not between Israel and Hamas, but it's between Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Palestinian clans. It is quite obvious that targeting this operative in the refugee camp could only have been achieved by inside information. And I've been following this story quite closely with sources both in Israel and Egypt. And although it's not been reported in mainstream media, it's pretty apparent that either a Hamas unit or one of the Arab clans, Arab family clans in Gaza, were aware of what Palestinian Islamic Jihad were doing and saw an opportunity to create room for themselves in this power play. So Islamic Jihad certainly want to achieve a very big issue with the IDF to give them the publicity to perhaps make them more credible as the main militant factor in the Gaza, whilst Hamas are seen to be negotiating with the Israelis. So the Israelis have to be on their guard. They're using their intelligence, and the clans have no truck with Islamic Jihad, nor with Hamas. Hamas has no truck with Islamic Jihad, who it sees as someone trying to vie for power, and Hamas have no truck with the clans. So this is an internal power play going on, and I'm pretty certain, and I hope I'm not correct, that either Hamas or Islamic Jihad will at some stage create an opportunity, create another terrorist attack, which, if not bring the ceasefire to a halt completely, will have severe consequences. So I see this attack and the Israeli response as being more of an internal power play between the Islamic groups rather than a breakdown in the ceasefire plan negotiated by Trump.
But how about people who do view this as ongoing military operations, of course, which is a violation to the ceasefire, which has, of course, been imposed by the United States. We have said that the US is constantly flying observatory drones over the Gaza Strip, and so it most likely will be aware of this. What are your thoughts, Peter?
No, you're absolutely right, sir, that this is definitely a violation of the ceasefire. However, because of the context of why this breach of the ceasefire was taken out, the politicians, the active players, the influencers in the region will just put this aside as being an unfortunate episode, an incident that's bound to happen. No one can guarantee a 100% ceasefire, so this will be put in on the back burner until such time as there is a major incident which everyone is fearing. I have no doubt that there are players in the region, maybe from the Islamic terrorist groups and Hamas themselves, that still want to retain overall influence over Gaza. One of the ways they can achieve that is by undertaking an atrocity, and Israel has to be on their guard, and they're using their influence with the Arab clans, who are both opposed to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, to try and get them to have more influence. But as far as the ceasefire is concerned, you're totally right, it is a breach, but because it's a minor breach and because of the context of why it was breached, why it occurred, the politicians will just say, will breathe a sigh of relief that it wasn't anything more severe than one terrorist trying to carry out a terrorist attack and was eliminated.
Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to talk to you, as always. We now move on to our final story, and one person is dead and 6 others are injured after a shooting on the campus of Lincoln University of Pennsylvania. District Attorney Christopher Di Barrena Sabore said during an overnight news conference that 7 people were shot during homecoming festivities at the university. He said that 1 person is in custody and was in possession of a gun. The school was placed on lockdown, but it has since been lifted. Officials said they do not believe there is an active threat to the campus. The shooting happened during the school's tailgate and Yard Fest event near the football field. The school is located around 50 miles from Philadelphia. Well, that is all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more global news updates.